The night was quiet, so quiet it almost felt sacred. A soft wind brushed through the open window, carrying with it the scent of rain-soaked earth and city lights. Somewhere in that silence, Xiao Zhan sat by the edge of his bed, a dim lamp throwing a faint golden glow across the room. His phone screen was lit, his thumb hovering over a name that needed no label. Wang Yibo. Just two words that carried years of memories, laughter, arguments, and something deeper, something words could never quite capture. He hesitated, exhaled, and finally whispered, "Good night." It was simple. But for Xiao Zhan, those words carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken sentences. It was not just a good night. It was a reminder, a confession, and a bridge between two souls separated by distance, fame, and the world's relentless noise. On the other side of the city, Wang Yibo's phone buzzed. He was still awake, headphones on, staring blankly at his reflection in the dark window of his studio. The music had stopped, but he hadn't noticed. His thoughts had drifted far away, to someone who once sat beside him under bright studio lights, laughing at silly jokes, eyes glimmering with warmth. When he saw Xiao Zhan's name appear on the screen, a small, involuntary smile curved his lips. He didn't reply immediately. He didn't need to, because sometimes silence said more than any word ever could. The story between them was never loud. It wasn't painted in grand gestures or public declarations. It lived in the spaces between looks, in the tiny moments no one else noticed. Like the way Yibo's eyes would always find Xiao Zhan first during interviews, or how Xiao Zhan instinctively turned his body slightly toward Yibo when cameras flashed. To the outside world they were co-stars, professionals, two talents whose paths happened to cross. But to those who looked closer, there was something undeniably magnetic, an energy that refused to be contained. When The Untamed wrapped years ago, they both walked off that set changed forever. The fantasy world they had lived in, the swords, the laughter, the brotherhood, had ended, but something real had quietly taken root in its place. The bond didn't fade when the lights dimmed. It simply went underground, hidden from curious eyes, protected by the unspoken understanding between them. There were nights like this one, though. Nights when the silence became too heavy, and one of them reached out, even with something as small as a whispered good night. Xiao Zhan leaned back against the headboard, eyes closed. The sound of rain began to patter gently outside, drumming a soft rhythm that reminded him of another night long ago. It was during a late shoot, exhaustion heavy on their shoulders. The crew had packed up, the set lights dimmed, and the world had fallen into the hush of midnight. They had sat side by side, too tired to speak, yet too comfortable to leave. Xiao Zhan remembered the way Yibo had slowly leaned his head back and whispered, "It's quiet." And Xiao Zhan, smiling faintly, had replied, "Yeah, but it's a nice kind of quiet." That night had stayed with him, because it was the first time he realized that silence with Wang Yibo wasn't empty. It was full. Full of trust, full of peace, full of the kind of understanding that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Now, years later, that same feeling lingered in the air. Meanwhile, Wang Yibo stood by the window, watching as the rain blurred the city lights into soft streaks of gold and blue. He thought about texting back. He thought about typing, "Good night," too. But he didn't. Instead, he pulled out the small notebook he always carried, a habit he'd developed over the years. Inside were fragments of lyrics, random thoughts, doodles, and one page he never showed anyone. At the top of that page were two words, whispered "Good night." He'd written it months ago without knowing why. Maybe because that phrase reminded him of Xiao Zhan's voice, gentle, calming, yet filled with emotions that ran deep beneath the surface. He turned the page slowly, his fingers lingering on the worn edges, and felt that same familiar warmth spreading through him. Sometimes connection didn't need presence. It lived in shared memories, in the energy that refused to fade even when everything else changed. Later that night, a small message blinked across Xiao Zhan's screen. "Wang Yibo. Still awake?" Xiao Zhan smiled faintly, typing back, "Couldn't sleep." Then came a pause. "Wang Yibo. Listen to the rain." He did. The sound filled the room, wrapping around him like a melody only they could hear. For the next few minutes, neither of them said anything more. The call connected, and only the soft sound of rain passed between them. No words, no noise, just the simple comfort of knowing the other was there. It wasn't the first time they'd done this, calling each other and saying nothing. It had become their quiet ritual, something they both understood without needing to explain. Eventually, Xiao Zhan's breathing grew softer, slower. "Sleep," Yibo murmured quietly into the receiver. "I'll stay until you do." Xiao Zhan didn't answer, but Yibo knew he heard him. He stayed there, eyes half closed, listening to the rhythm of Xiao Zhan's breathing until it evened out. Then softly he whispered, "Good night," and ended the call. Morning came with the golden hue of sunrise spilling through the curtains. Xiao Zhan woke to find the phone still beside him. The call log read 3 hours and 17 minutes. A soft laugh escaped him. Even after all these years, some things hadn't changed. He picked up his camera, a hobby that grounded him, and began taking photos of the morning light. The first image he captured was the reflection of that golden glow on his phone screen. Elsewhere, Wang Yibo sat in his studio, headphones on again, replaying a melody he'd been composing the night before. It was soft and delicate, almost like a lullaby. He named it Whispered Goodnight. The melody carried traces of the rain's rhythm, the hush of midnight, and the warmth of that silent call. Time moved on as it always does. The world outside remained loud and unpredictable. Rumors came and went, fans speculated, and both of them continued walking their separate yet strangely parallel paths. But behind every stage light and every lens, there was still that quiet thread tying them together. Sometimes, when the world grew too heavy, Yibo would find himself humming that tune. And somewhere, Xiao Zhan would pause, a strange calm washing over him, as if the universe had whispered something only he could hear. One night, after a particularly long day of filming, Xiao Zhan found himself scrolling through his phone again. The world around him was quiet once more. Without thinking too much, he sent another message. "Xiao Zhan, don't stay up too late." A minute later the reply came. "Wang Yibo, only if you promise to rest." Xiao Zhan smiled. "Deal." And then softly, because it had become their thing, he whispered to the air as if Yibo could hear him through the wind itself. "Good night." They say real connection doesn't fade. It simply evolves. It becomes quieter, deeper, more invisible to the eyes but louder to the soul. That's what Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo had become for each other. A quiet constant in a world that never stopped spinning. The rain had stopped, but the night still carried its memory. The smell of wet pavement, the gleam of city lights reflected in small puddles, and the faint chill that crept through the open window. Xiao Zhan stood there, wrapped in a blanket, gazing at the skyline as if searching for something beyond the horizon. Sleep wouldn't come. His mind kept returning to that soft voice from the night before. Wang Yibo's quiet "sleep," said with such care that it echoed in his heart even now. It wasn't the word itself, but the way it was said. Gentle, protective, almost like a promise. He closed his eyes and remembered the way things used to be. The shared glances on set, the teasing during rehearsals, the warmth of familiarity that had built up over years of trust. The cameras might have stopped rolling, but those moments never really ended. They just became memories that whispered back at the most unexpected times. A small notification lit up his phone. "Wang Yibo, can't sleep." Xiao Zhan chuckled quietly, shaking his head. "He knows me too well." He typed back, "Still awake." "You too." There was a pause, and then Yibo's reply appeared. "Step outside. Look up." Curious, Xiao Zhan walked to his balcony. The air was cool and clean after the rain, the sky painted with soft streaks of cloud and faint starlight. Somewhere miles away, Wang Yibo stood under that same sky, staring upward, their worlds connected by the same quiet night. For a moment neither spoke. The silence between them stretched, not empty but full of what had been and what still lingered. Then Yibo's voice came through the line, low and unhurried. You ever wonder, he said, if the stars can hear us? Xiao Zhan smiled, his voice soft. Maybe. But I think they already know what we don't say. A small laugh came from the other end. A rare, genuine sound that made Xiao Zhan's heart ache in that quiet, beautiful way only Yibo could cause. They talked for hours. About nothing and everything. About the smell of rain, the exhaustion of fame, the longing for silence. Yibo shared how he'd been working on a new melody, one inspired by the rain, and by Xiao Zhan's voice that night when he'd whispered, "Good night." "It's not finished yet," Yibo said. "But I want you to hear it first." He began playing it through the call. The tune was simple but haunting. Gentle piano chords blending with the faint hum of background rain he'd recorded earlier. It wasn't just music. It was emotion turned into sound. Xiao Zhan sat in silence, eyes glistening. Each note felt like a memory. Soft laughter backstage, shared noodles between rehearsals, quiet glances during interviews. Every beat was a story they'd lived. Hidden from the world but alive in moments like this. When the last note faded, Xiao Zhan whispered, "It's beautiful, Yibo. It sounds like..." Yibo finished for him. "Like a good night you don't want to end." Xiao Zhan didn't respond. He didn't need to. The quiet between them said everything. Later, when the conversation drifted to an easy hush, Yibo spoke again, his tone thoughtful. Sometimes I think people only see the versions of us that cameras capture. The polished ones. But the real parts, they're in these moments. Yeah, Xiao Zhan said softly. The ones no one writes about. The truth was, fame had built walls around them. Every move, every smile, every silence became something for others to interpret. But here, at 2 a.m, under the same quiet sky, they were just Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo again. Two people who found comfort in the sound of each other's breathing. Yibo exhaled, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm glad you texted last night." Xiao Zhan smiled faintly, looking up at the stars. "I almost didn't." "Well," Yibo replied with a small laugh, "then I'd still be awake, waiting for something I couldn't name." That line hit Xiao Zhan like a soft wave. He didn't answer, just closed his eyes, letting the feeling wash over him. There were so many things he wanted to say. "I miss you. I'm proud of you. I wish things were simpler." But instead he said the only thing that ever truly mattered. "Good night, Yibo." This time, Yibo didn't just whisper it back. He said it like a promise. "Good night, Xiao Zhan." When morning came, Yibo sat at his keyboard again. The melody from last night still lingered in his mind, but now it had something more. A new emotion he couldn't quite define. He began to play, and this time he added lyrics. "In the quiet after rain. Your voice still lingers in the dark. Every word we never say finds its way into my heart." He stopped, smiled, and whispered to himself, "For him." Meanwhile, Xiao Zhan brewed his morning tea, sunlight spilling across the counter. His phone buzzed with a voice note from Yibo, just the melody, unfinished but alive. He played it once, twice, and then laughed quietly. "Still whispering good night, huh?" He grabbed his camera again and took a photo of the morning light hitting the steam of his tea. Then, for no reason other than instinct, he sent it to Yibo. "Xiao Zhan, for when you finish the song." A few minutes later the reply came. "Wang Yibo, already did." Weeks passed, but that night stayed with both of them. It wasn't about the words or the rain or even the music. It was about the understanding, the kind that lived quietly in the background, constant and invisible, like the hum of the city after midnight. And every once in a while, when the nights grew long and the world felt too heavy, one of them would send a message. "Still awake. Always." No explanations. No promises. Just two souls meeting in the quiet. And every time they said goodnight, it wasn't an ending. It was a continuation. Of trust, of friendship, of something eternal that refused to fade. Because for Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo, every whispered goodnight carried 1,000 unspoken good mornings. Clapperboard outro for your YouTube video. If you loved this continuation of whispered goodnight, and felt the emotion between Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo through every quiet moment. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel.